15, I'd like to call this meeting of the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee to order. Chairman Spiros is on Zoom, so I'll be chairing this meeting. Right now, item 2, identify any potential conflicts of interest. Do we have any potential conflicts of interest? Seeing none. Number 3, citizens' comments. Do we have any citizens' comments? Seeing none. Item 4, consent agenda. Minutes of the August 5th, 2025 meeting and bills and payroll. Looking for a motion?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
We have a motion. All those in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. I'm saying, yeah, I messed that up. Okay, consider, items removed. Request to recommend council approval of budget resolution number 18-2025 Adler Road Trail project, presented by Jennifer Selensky, our finance director.
Good evening. So this one goes back a ways to 2020 when the city was awarded a Transportation Alternatives Program 80/20 plus grant from the Wisconsin DOT. And this was for the design and construction of the bicycle pedestrian trail that runs on the south side of Adler Road Trail. And this project, it had a couple of phases. The first phase was the design phase, and this was managed by the DOT, which handled invoicing the city just for our 20% plus local share. The construction phase is almost wrapped up, and this side of the project is being managed by the city, whereby we paid contractors directly, and then we submit a reimbursement request to the DOT for the 80% of the costs that they will pay. In 2024, it should be noted that the construction bids came in higher than expected, and then Public Works Director Tom Turchi asked the DOT for an increase in the award amount, which we did receive to help cover those construction costs. And in addition, we received $69,217 in donations from our community to help offset some of these project costs. Now, the bad news is this grant, going back to 2020, had estimated project costs at that time of $76,516 for design, and then $255 for construction. When the grant award, in that grant award, the estimated construction costs were then revised to $478,903. At that point in time, the city's, based on the grant documents from the DOT, the city's anticipated share was going to be $135,029. And we had planned to fund that with $35,000 from room tax and $100,000 in long-term debt. However, the project isn't quite closed, and we anticipate that the final cost of this whole project is actually going to be $768,672. And this is based on the unbilled contract amounts with the construction crew, plus a $5,000 contingency for any and unanticipated additional staff time. The DOT is going to cover 80% of the eligible construction costs, but it doesn't cover all expenses. There were non-participating costs such as city staff time and resources, land acquisition, and minor incidental expenses that occurred during primarily the design phase that weren't initially budgeted. These expenses weren't included in the DOT award letter, but are a part of the total project cost. So we're estimating that the funding shortfall for this whole project will be approximately $85,500. Since the shortfall is occurring in years past, it's not logical to go and borrow debt for things of the past, so staff is recommending budget resolution 18-2025 to completely fund this project. And this will utilize fund balance. You'll recall in 2024, we did add a healthy amount to our fund balance, with the offset being on the expense side, a transfer over to the capital improvement fund for the project, and that utilizes the contingency expense account. Now, it should also be noted that the city administrator's expense account is almost fully utilized for 2025, so this would be dipping into that other contingency account that we set aside for unanticipated expenditures such as this that would come along. So with that, staff recommends approval of budget resolution 18-2025.
So the recommended action is to recommend council approval. Do I have any motions?
I'll make that motion to approve.
Any seconds? I will second that motion and open the floor for discussion. Is there any discussion? Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you. Do we have a good understanding of how this happened?
I think we do. I think if we look back to 2020 when this project started, we didn't have a systematic way to track our project expenditures, nor all cumulative aspects of a project. And I think just with the transition between where the 3 public works directors in since the time this project started, I think things got lost in transition. These grant awards were issued back in 2020 and didn't follow through in our capital improvement planning for budgetary expenditures. Today, we have accurate reporting on our projects. We assign a project to each and every project out there. In our CIP, I am working more closely with our current interim public works director to make sure that we have copies of all agreements that are associated, and we are in pretty regular communication about those non-participating costs so that we can make sure that they're included in the budget. So in this budget cycle, we've got 4 grants with the DOT coming up for road projects, and we have laid out all of the costs as we know them today, and have planned for when those contracts will be signed to make sure they're funded at the time that those contracts are signing. So we have made a lot of improvements in our project tracking that should eliminate any such overage on a project like this.
Well, I do definitely appreciate the work you put into that, because these are painful, and
Yes.
especially with their financial situation, it just, so keep up the good work, please.
Thank you.
You're doing well, thanks.
Rebecca?
Thank you. So I was trying to make my way through the memo while I was doing some math. So in 2020, the construction cost was $379,255, but the total ended up in 2025 being $786,672. Am I reading that correctly? So the total project doubled in 5 years?
Back in 2020, when we apply for a grant with the DOT, we estimate what our design costs will be and what our construction costs will be. And there's an opportunity to include things that are non-participating costs, such as the DOT won't give you a cost share on land acquisition or your internal time. And when I look back at that SMA, which is the agreement, we hadn't included those estimated costs, and they might not have been known. Sometimes with a DOT project, for instance, on our new ones, we thought we could not or would not have land acquisition costs, but now they're being added in. So this is something that may have happened. I don't know, back in 2020, whatever they put on that cost sheet for estimating. But it doesn't look like any of those non-participating costs, which we hired a consultant to go through the process of assessing what land would be acquired and then actually following through and through the payment to the property owners. So that was not even included. So those numbers that you're seeing were what staff thought at the time. And then as the project progressed, these other costs, had to occur in order to complete the trail.
I get all that. I mean, I do understand all that. I feel like I remember the land acquisition cost was not tremendous for this project, if I recall. And I get it, the soft cost, you're not charging for staff time, you're not charging both. But I mean, this doubled. This doubled. This cannot happen again. Like, it just cannot. And if, and I'm at a point where our budget is where I just don't even feel like we should entertain any more trails. And I did notice one in our CIP, because we can't afford it. I mean, this is crazy. $800,000 plus to finish a trail. And we can't hire firemen without going, to referendum. Like this, no. These kind of mistakes, that cannot continue to happen. And I just as a matter of principle will not support this.
Any other discussion? I have a question. Do we have a choice but to pass this? I mean, what happens if this doesn't make it out of committee? I mean, this is already a project in progress. I mean, would we default on paying vendors and suppliers? I mean, what happens?
No, the vendors and suppliers have been paid. So this is making the fund whole. So when we didn't have project accounting, all of the money just kind of, the revenues and expenditures were just kind of lumped in as a group. So if we had funded other projects, timing wise, through room tax or debt, this particular one is being charged in the Parks and Rec fund. So you can think of it as that funding floating this funding, but eventually it will catch up and all of the projects need to be paid and break even. So this is the last project in the Parks and Rec that needs to be reconciled completely, so that everything is clean and we know exactly what funding goes with what expenditures and projects.
I agree with Rebecca. This is almost twice the cost. It's amazing. Seeing for no more discussion, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of that motion, vote aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
No.
Motion doesn't pass. Item 7, request to recommend council approval of budget resolution number 19-2025, certified sites grant presented by Jennifer Selensky, the finance director.
Okay, so this one you can think of just as kind of a procedural type budget resolution. In late of 2024, staff decided to make a promotional video for our Yellowstone Park, industrial park. And this was a collaboration between Wood County, Mackay, and the city of Marshfield. Instead of hiring an outside service to do the video, our internal production team produced the video itself. Wood County agreed to fund half of the cost, which was $5,000, and then the city had budgeted to pay Mackay $6,000 for promotional marketing and entrepreneurial development activities. So what Mackay agreed to do was to reduce that city contribution to them by $2,500 and fund that video instead. When the budget for 2025 was created, we didn't know how this funding would all shake out. So this budget resolution, in effect, charges or reimburses effectively through Mackey and the county for the production of this video. So with that, I would ask staff recommends approval of budget resolution 19-2025.
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Item 8, request to recommend council approval to update the agreement with Marshfield School District for the Resource Officer Program, presented by Steve Barr, City Administrator.
Thank you. Well, last year we got an agreement in place for the first time with the school district to fund a portion of our school resource officer program. We have 2 school resource officers, one in the middle school, one in the high school. And at that time, the estimated cost of each one, roughly $95,000. The school district agreed to pay for one of those 2 officers if the city covered the other. And that is a split I do hear when I go to other conferences and talk to peers, oftentimes like a 50-50 split between the city and the school district. In talking with Jordan and Jennifer, they took another look at some of the cost, and we recently met with Ryan Christensen, the superintendent of schools. Jody Gerink, the police chief, was with us as well. And when we got together, we talked about what would be a fair rate going forward. And Ryan Christensen, the school superintendent, was supportive of $100,000, a good bump up for us to make sure we're covering all of our costs for that one officer, wages, benefits, and so forth. So if you look at the agreement that was in your packet, you're only going to see 2 changes, and I'll describe them real quickly. The first one, which is fairly minor, is on section 6, and that is on page 4. The term of the agreement obviously changed from August 1 through July 31st from 24 to 25, moving that up a year. So it's now for the 25-26 school year. And it will annually renew if the other party doesn't ask for a renegotiation by June 1st. The bigger change, and it's actually a new section, is at the back of the document, which is called Schedule A. And this is a way to build in future cost increases without having to keep going back to the table. And if you look at it, it's fairly basic. It says $100,000 is going to be the cost through July 31st of 2026. Starting with the next year, there'll be an annual increase. They wanted a cap and we wanted a floor, as you can imagine. So we set the cap at 5% and the floor at 1%. So we're going to look at the consumer price index under the the Urban Consumers Report. And if it's 3%, 4%, whatever that will be, the increase for the following year. But again, if we have an inflation like we did back in 2022, it'll never go higher than 5. And no matter what the inflation rate is, it will never go lower than 1% increase. They make installment payments on 2 installments during the year, July 1st and January 1st. So we find this to be a good agreement. It should carry us going forward. The 2 sides can always come back to the table, but it seemed like a good compromise as far as to how to handle these going forward. Ryan's going to bring it through the process. He started, I believe, with committees at the school board level. And so we're looking for the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee to support this and send it to the council, that if the school district agrees, we would agree on this contract for 25-26.
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion to approve. All those in favor say aye. Oh, discussion, sorry. Any discussion? Mike?
I would just like to give a public thank you to the school district for being receptive to doing this. It really should have happened years ago, so I was glad to see that they're supporting it.
Yeah, I would agree. They've been very cooperative on this over the last couple of years, and I agree with you.
Any further discussion? We have a motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Nay. Motion carries. Item 9, discuss additional information regarding Alderman O'Reilly's request to track hours worked by exempt employees, presented by Sarah Dressel, Human Resources Director.
Good evening, everyone. Let me just get this started here. So first, I just want to say that I appreciate the time that I could take to do a little bit more research and provide you with a little bit more of an update per our last discussion that we had at the last Finance, Budget, and Personnel meeting. So I'll walk through the slides and then we can definitely talk more from there. So first, again, from our last meeting, I was asked to reach out just for some legal information and things like that, so I did do that. Their main recommendation was that we review the benefits and the risks that are associated with moving forward with tracking time, and then that discussion can kind of spur, your decision on what to do next. So the following slides are the information that I gathered from the previous meeting as far as benefits and things like that, and then research that I did, and then obviously the information that I got back from our employment team. So first, starting with the benefits of tracking exempt employee hours. So there is accountability and transparency. It does allow for full disclosure of the hours that are worked by exempt employees. So right now, if you look at an exempt employee's time card, it basically shows 8 hours per day, 5 days a week. The only changes to that would be if there's time off or anything like that. Otherwise, it's kind of auto-filled. And that's just so that we can pay the salaries each week. So it doesn't really take into account times right now where we may work 10 hours in a day or, 7 if we worked a lot the day before. So resource management. If a new position is needed or a position needs to be modified for some reason, by doing this, there would be details on hours worked that can be added to the justification, where we can see maybe there's too many hours being worked, we might need a new position, things like that. So that would aid in that. Productivity and workload. Big decisions could be made with the data that's collected to improve productivity and efficiency, as well as showcasing some challenges with the workloads. So it would show maybe where there's some gaps in staffing, or in some cases where there might be overstaffing. It would also help with leave and time off transparency. As I mentioned, our systems do currently showcase when someone is off or they're on a leave of absence for whatever reason. All of that is already put into our timekeeping system. But what this would do is just solidify that things are more accurate as far as time worked versus time being taken off, things like that. Misclassification. So if for some reason it was determined that an exempt employee was misclassified as an exempt employee and they should have been a non-exempt employee, so an hourly employee instead, having accurate records on time would help in correcting that issue if we needed to do that. The good news is typically we're not making the decision to have a job classified specifically as exempt in a vacuum here. We do use McGrath typically to do all of the checks that need to be done in order to determine if a job is exempt status worthy. So the likelihood that that would happen is very, very small, which is a good thing. But again, capturing time would help with that. Project management is a big one, and I think it was identified at our last meeting. Project management would allow for better cost tracking for projects, allows for us to be able to determine how much time is spent on a specific project. We do this on occasion, I believe, when we have grants or specific projects where we need to know how many hours are being put into those projects. But I would say it's probably inconsistent for ones that we don't necessarily need that information, and maybe that would be useful for future projects. So definitely there is that positive aspect with that. Prevention of burnout and promotion of work-life balance. By tracking time, it does allow the city to identify employees that are consistently working excessive hours, and it would encourage the city to help that employee focus on better distribution of workload, maybe transitioning some work to other individuals, or anything that can be done to kind of provide that better work-life balance and maybe shrink that number of hours. Public trust and fiscal responsibility, this was also mentioned. Tracking time does enhance the public's perception and accountability of our workers. The citizens are the taxpayers, so it would provide that transparency to them. So these are kind of the main benefits that were identified, I would say, by this group when we were talking the last time, as well as legal also concurred with these. So next are just some of the risks that were identified. So I'll kind of walk through those. First is potential loss of an exemption. So inconsistently or overly detailing time tracking can raise questions about an employee's exempt status and could have some issues. For example, if an issue was brought before the Department of Labor, or there was a court case that involved like hours worked and things like that, the Department of Labor could take the position that if an employer is treating an exempt person as non-exempt, that they could take the position then you need to transition any employee that you're doing that to a non-exempt person. It could cost money is essentially what this piece is saying. So that was one thing to just kind of keep in mind. Administrative burden. With this being new to many of the exempt population that we have, this could be an increased workload for the city administrator and any directors of the departments who would need to like manage punching. So for example, if someone forgets to punch in, they have to put a punch correction through. That does take whoever their direct supervisor is to correct and fix. What that means is it's not something that can be asked of payroll or of, let's say, HR even to do in like instead of that supervisor doing it. The reason is there has to be some checks and balances. There has to be that separation of the direct supervisor doing it. When we have audits, that is something that they do ask, like who approves, who does all of these things. So it does need to be separate. So that's one thing. Cultural impact and morale. Moving exempt employees to a punching system may signal a lack of trust by leadership and reduce the employees' morale, even their motivation to continue to work at the pace that they are currently working at. Essentially seeing on paper that you work 50 hours a week versus just working 50 hours a week to complete a task, there is a psychological difference in that. So just, again, something to kind of keep in mind with this. With retention and recruitment issues, current employees may feel micromanaged, potentially causing them to, in the future, look for other opportunities, as well as high caliber candidates that are trying or applying for our exempt positions. They may choose to look elsewhere if they feel that we are lacking flexibility, or they may feel that our professional work expectations aren't meeting what they need. Again, kind of that micromanagement feel. They could potentially decline our offer for employment. And I will stress that it is very difficult to fill those positions already. So that is one thing to kind of keep in mind. Loss of flexibility, punching in and out does, or I should say may discourage work being completed outside of normal work hours and may lead actually to a reduced output in an initiative. I would say a good majority of exempt employees do tasks that are not done in their work office. They do them from home, they do them when they're on vacation. Again, work-life balance is one thing. Sometimes it's just out of the sheer love of what they do. So, but it does potentially risk that. Focus on hours versus output. Exempt employees that are used to being evaluated on what they're delivering and the quality of work they do may find that they are also changing their focus to the amount of hours that they work, and this could, again, reduce the output of the work that they are doing. Reduced job satisfaction. Employees may feel that they aren't allowed to manage their own schedules on their own, and that could lead to lower job satisfaction. And then feeling undervalued, if an employee can see that they are working a significant amount of time over 40 hours because it's right there on their timesheet week over week, they could start to do the math based upon the salary that they have and calculate out what their hourly rate would be. I've seen this happen, and it does sometimes cause people to look for other employment where they might have, again, more of that flexibility and things like that. So those are kind of the benefits and risks. There's about 8 of each. These were the main ones. This is definitely not an all-inclusive list, but these were the main ones that I saw, basically commonly through all of the research, and then, like I said, the legal overview. I did want to provide some information from the counties and the municipalities that I requested information from. I think I mentioned at the last meeting that I had sent an email out to, I believe it was about 103 different municipalities and counties across the state of Wisconsin, just to kind of gather some details and information from them. 25 counties did complete, it's basically a survey within a survey. So one county sent me the information on, it was basically the same question had got sent out to all the counties, and so they had collected it already. So of the 25 counties that had completed that survey on exempt tracking, many of them actually did track all time. 10 of those counties did a pure clock in and a clock out each day. 2 counties instead just entered the amount of time that they worked in a day. So if they, worked 9 hours, they worked 9 hours, they just put 9 hours in. They didn't say it was from, a certain time to a certain time. Most of what I saw from counties specifically was that they are tracking this so that they can apply that time to a project or a grant. It was a very specific reason, and it was outlined in policies. Some of the counties that do require punching didn't actually require 40 hours a week. They were typically requiring somewhere between 37.5 to 40 hours per week. And then anything that was over 40 hours, they were granted professional time off that they could take at a later date. So it was essentially sort of along the lines of comp time, but that's what they, again, had in policy and things like that in place. Of the communities that I reached out to, there were 18 cities, towns, and villages that did respond to my request for information. 2 cities responded that their exempt employees only record, again, the hours that they work each day, not necessarily like a specific punch in and punch out. Again, for a lot of them, anything over 40 was allowed to be carried over as what they called like a flex time, or again, professional time. And then they could use that at a later date, but they had a max amount of what you could have in that like banked time. Multiple cities commented that they, again, only require like 37.5 to 38.5-ish hours. It seems really specific, but they were specific when they sent it to me. But basically, the reasoning behind that would be most cities, villages, towns, most of us have to attend evening meetings, so that's where you make up the rest of that time typically. So that was good information. Overall, the majority of the answers that I got back was that they are not tracking exempt time. It just wasn't necessarily a thing for cities, towns, and villages. So I put this in here as just some questions that I think would really be good for consideration as far as before making a decision. I think we would want to have some of this clarified or answered. One would be, what truly will be done with this data that's collected? If someone is working more than 40 hours a week, how do we determine what a standard number of hours is, depending upon the role, the department? Does it matter? Does it not? If someone is identified as working too many hours, what's going to be done for that employee? Are we going to have some ability to look for additional employees? I think we know that that's probably not the case, considering we don't budget for ones that we currently know that we need. So again, I come back to one thing to keep in mind is if someone is happily working 50 to 55 hours a week right now, blindly, they just do it because they love their job. if we put it on paper, we're punching a clock and we're telling them that that could be a concern and a risk. So just one thing to keep in mind. And then what would happen if someone is working under 40 hours consistently, but they're completing all their tasks and duties? FLSA says that that's okay. If they work 1 hour in a week, technically FLSA says they're an exempt employee, they should get paid their full paycheck. FLSA doesn't allow us to make deductions of time except in the case of public employees. So there is an exception, which is kind of on my next page. It's called the public accountability exception. If we have in policy the ability to do partial day absences or things like that, we can dock pay. Like, let's say someone ran out of sick time or vacation time or things like that, but then all of a sudden something comes up and they're sick or whatever. There is a public accountability exception where, based upon policies that are in place, or if we create a new policy, we can actually deduct pay from our exempt employees. So this is one of those odd, different things that is in is law. So, kind of going back to my point is FLSA doesn't necessarily generally allow for deductions of time, but we would have the exception with that. So I did want to point that out. Is the need to collect this data due to poor performance or underperformance by a person or a team? If it is, should we instead be tracking the areas of specific concern versus the entire exempt population? Or should we be punching in and out for only specific tasks or projects, like example, engineering projects, or projects that are like multiple departments involved or things like that? You know, should we focus more on that? I think if part of this is the feel that maybe there are some underperforming departments, I think, you know, first and foremost, we really need to make sure that the underperformance would be due to lack of working appropriate hours. If that's the case, again, should it just be that group that we're focusing on, or should it be our entire population? And then lastly is the data that we're collecting, so the punching in, punching out, all of that, is it ultimately worth any of the risks that were outlined? You know, do the benefits kind of outweigh those risks? And are citizens or other entities regularly asking for this information? Has it been a concern that's been brought up? I think those, again, should be weighed in the consideration. And then lastly, just large quantities of hours that are worked by an individual does not necessarily mean that you're getting a large amount of output of productivity. For example, I might be able to do in 6 hours what someone, you know, might be able to do in 2. But I'll happily do it in 6 and continue to do additional work that would equate the same output amount. And maybe eventually I will get, you know, more efficient and things like that. But I think an emphasis on 40 hours a week equals what is needed for an exempt level job, it's a little tough. So I think we would really have to figure out like what is a normal amount of hours. Some departments have fluctuating needs depending on seasonality for activities. So for example, several months, maybe 40 hours a week is enough for the job to get done effectively, while during busy seasonal months, maybe it takes 50 or 55 hours. The important part is really completing those tasks versus maybe the number of hours specifically that they're working, but will that be taken into account? Is that transparency okay, will people be satisfied with that, with this data? Policy updates and or creation of new policies may be needed to provide accountability and transparency to employees with this. For example, consideration will need to be made for after hours work, as I mentioned, travel time, offsite work, et cetera. Like, what would count towards their hours worked? I know a couple of comments that I received was, you know, sometimes when I'm at home, I see a commercial and I think about something I need to do for work. So I grab my notebook, I'm jotting down my stuff. Does that count as hours worked? Do I need to clock that in? Just, again, that's a little example, but something to kind of keep in mind. With that, that kind of completes the basic information that hopefully I provided, what you were kind of looking for. I am looking forward to the additional discussion that we'll have.
Recommended action is discretion of this committee. Does anyone have any questions, comments? Mike?
I actually would like to move to approve punching the clock and tracking the hours to get to a good discussion point on this. I have a lot to say, and hopefully we can get a second to get into that discussion.
Just to clarify too, this is discretion, so you do not need a motion for discussion. You certainly may make the motion, but you can discuss without a motion when it's discretion of the body.
Go ahead, Mike. You have further comments?
Okay, for starters, thank you. And I knew you were under the gun with this one, and I was waiting for it to come in, hoping it would get it. I did have enough time to go through it. I wish we had more time, but I understand the circumstances. So I'm going to just run through page by page. Excuse me. And just the first, I made a bunch of notes. So update from finance, budget, and personnel page. The first bullet point, HR reached out to legal for this information. What's ironic about this is I did a lot of research on my own and I found almost verbatim what's in here. So I hope you didn't pay a lot for the legal on it.
It wasn't so much the benefits. They helped more with like the risks.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Benefits, I actually took no notes and found it very much on cue with the same things that I had seen on there. The risks, I guess I commented on every one. So okay. We'll say the loss of exemption, general note on that is, in reality, this would mean that exempt employees are not necessarily being categorized correctly in the first place. If having this information brings it to light that it could potentially expose the city to a problem, that's kind of acknowledging that something's wrong in the first place. Just not tracking it is not a reason that it would potentially expose the city. It's an interesting concept, and I understand where that comes from, but that was actually very concerning to hear that as a possible risk on it. I'll continue on the first bullet point on that. Requiring an exempt employee to track and report hours may create a perception that the employee is not truly functioning with discretion of independence necessary, blah, blah. I did some looking into this, and what I found on Nationwide, it was kind of generic stuff that I could Google and find, but came up with several different locations that said 30 to 50% of businesses are tracking all exempt employees. I found another one that said 40, which is right in the middle of that. So we have a significant amount of the population that's actually doing this. And if these risks were that realistic, I don't think you would see that many people doing it.
So I think I just want to clarify, essentially what that bullet point is saying is, so for example, if there were other issues or other reasons that brought a court case to like the Department of Labor, essentially what it's saying is, let's say the thought process could be, they could be either exempt or non-exempt, but we're treating them like a non-exempt, then we should just treat them like a non-exempt and make them hourly. That's essentially what it's saying. It's a risk in the sense that when you transition an exempt employee then to a non-exempt role, the risk is to, like the city, for example, now we have to start paying that employee for any hours they work over 40, which means if they are typically an employee that their output takes them 45 hours. Now we have to say those 5 hours that you typically work, you can't work those anymore, or we're going to pay the overtime, which is fine. But again, with budgets the way they are, that's why I put this on there. Yeah, it's basically not, it's not what you're thinking, I think. It's more, if there were a court case and there was a deciding factor, the Department of Labor may choose to say, you're treating them like a non-exempt in a variety of ways, they should go non-exempt. I wouldn't say that generally, like I said, we go through a group that does all of the testing that is necessary for our jobs, which is extensive. So I don't think that it's necessarily a risk, but I needed to put it on there.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. I just, like I said, when you have basically 40% of people that are tracking it, if it were that big of a risk, you wouldn't see these places doing it like they are. It's just a common sense.
I'll be honest, though, I don't know how much I truly believe that number. And the only reason I will say that I have a hard time with that is I worked in the private sector most of my career, and I haven't punched a clock since I was like maybe my very first job out of college that was an hourly job. It's very atypical for any of the jobs that I have ever worked.
Yeah.
So I believe it does exist because I saw it myself. I just think that that is a very high number,
It could
in my
be.
opinion.
It very well could
So.
be, and Google can always be trusted. No, it was just what I found.
Sure.
When I heard that, I was kind of surprised, and then the numbers you had given kind of reflected in that same neighborhood. You were talking about roughly 25% of them in the public sector. So, it doesn't make it that unreasonable to me. I just thought it was definitely worth the discussion. Administrative burden, indicating that time tracking will increase the workload for administrators, directors. I think for one, it would be a very short-lived impact. And personally, I don't think that the burden is anything of size. I mean, you're talking about people getting used to punching a clock or whatever mechanism you'd need to track the hours. Within a couple months, it would be figured out and people would understand. You have the same thing with people that punch a clock. It happens. People forget to do it. You have to make changes. It's not like we're not suited to deal with those issues. So I didn't see that as a big risk, I guess. Cultural impact and morale. It may signal a lack of trust and reduce overall morale. I would remind that not tracking creates a lack of trust for taxpayers. If creating a record of hours worked reduces morale and motivation, we really need to question that employee's situation that we're in, because I don't think that being accountable for what you do should ever be a morale killer, or really impact motivation. If you have people that are motivated to do a good job, they're going to do a good job regardless. Just my input on it. Retention and recruitment issues. I had a couple notes on this one. In reality, I don't see how this would impact flexibility if used correctly. And I think basically tracking hours, I don't see anything changing on how the employees work now. We would just track the hours work. And the way I look at this is nothing but a tool for everybody to better examine, kind of what the hours are, keep an eye on if we do have someone overloaded, I don't see it impacting someone being able to take off a Thursday and do their work on Saturday, or unless that's an issue now, I don't know why this would change it. I don't look at this as something that's going to create a really rigid stance that you are here from this long to this long each day. I'm looking at it as a tool, to create a record and accountability for everything. Risk, loss of flexibility. This would not discourage work outside normal working hours, the way I envision it. Focus on hours versus input. Salaried employees are accustomed to being evaluated on deliverables and quality of work. I don't see that changing. A lot of these risks make it sound like you're moving it to an hourly employee and it's going to be looked at this way. I look at it as more of a generic tool to evaluate how many hours are being worked. Are we pushing some people too hard? Are some people pushing themselves too hard? Is it creating a problem internally that When we're not tracking it, we don't know. You know, there's just no way to determine that. Reduce job satisfaction, manage their own schedules. Again, kind of the same issue. They can still manage their own hours. Feeling undervalued. I don't quite understand this concept, but I get what they're trying to say. But in reality, I guess this is a protection for these employees to assure their work ethic is not being abused. And I think we'll be real surprised moving forward with this when the information is there. And if you look at a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, you're going to have a very good record. Well, I'll get into it in one of the future ones a little bit. County and municipality info, many track time to apply to project grants. This would just be another benefit of it. But in here, we had 25 counties that completed the survey, 10 clock in and out each day. 2 counties enter their total hours per day. What about the other 13 counties?
They don't track.
Okay, they don't track at all. So in that situation of just the respondents, I mean, we're almost at 50% out of those 25. So again, it kind of supports that same concept. Some counties that require punching only require 37 to 40 hours per week. I don't question the validity of that, but I will just bring up at our previous meeting on this, we were told that salary plays are based on 45 hours a week.
No, what I said is generally speaking, exempt employees, and it's a very general statement.
Yep.
45 is typically the standard that I have seen.
Yep.
So typically when you're hired for a position, that's a salary position, you know it's not a 40-hour-a-week position. So just in general.
Yeah. No, I
so
understand.
45 was not a specific number. It's just a number that I've typically seen.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I don't question the 37 and a half to 40. Well, I guess what I'm getting at is they're going to be doing the same job. You're just tracking the hours, and we're going to know more in a year or 2 years what's actually happening. Where if we continue down the path around, we'll have no idea again. And I just don't think that's a responsible way to move forward. Speaking about the 37 and a half to 38 and a half hours, attending meetings and stuff, I think meetings should be included in their hours. Absolutely. Why would you expect people to come to meetings and present and stuff without receiving reimbursement, or at least acknowledging that as part of your job for your reimbursement? Absolutely. That should all be figured into the hours that they would punch in and punch out for. What will be done with the data collected? I think there will be obviously a record kept, and how that's used would be developed in the policy afterwards. And I would strongly suggest that you don't get real crazy on what's done with it. I think at first you look at it as a tracking mechanism and as a tool to track this. And in the future, if you find different opportunities that are not extremely intrusive or getting into this, I think that it's going to provide a lot of benefits that people will refer back to this to say, well, what did we run into last year here? Or 2 years ago, or what's our running average on this for the last 3 years? It makes sense to me. If someone's working over 40 hours, how do you determine the standard number of hours? That's exactly it. This is to better understand hours being worked at this point and moving forward. If someone is identified as working too many hours, what would be done? This information can be used to better distribute job responsibilities, indicate additional help is required, and ultimately, with the restraints on the budget, this may require additional staff to come on board. And you may have to take away some of the wants in order to have the needs. The employees being taken care of, first are the most important operational aspect of this city, in my opinion. And you need to make sure that people aren't burning out, that they have a good work environment. I don't see the downfall in this unless internally it's being abused somehow, and hopefully someone would bring that up and that could be dealt with at the time. Same with the next bullet point down. I just basically said, refer to last. Is the need to collect this data due to poor performance or underperformance by a person of team? Potentially. It also could be to evaluate great performance. Again, it's just a tool. Should tracking be done for areas of specific concern versus the entire exempt population? I would believe that it should be the full exempt population because theoretically, things could appear to be going good and you may be overstaffed, you may be understaffed, but tracking everyone makes more sense. And if you're not tracking everyone and you're dealing with a certain portion, it is going to put them on an island and you're going to feel attacked. So I think doing it as a whole would be the most logical approach. Should punching in and out for specific task projects like engineering, interdepartmental tasks, and other items need to be tracked? Grants, for example, this could be a great opportunity once hours start being tracked. Is the data collected worth some risks? I believe it is. I don't believe citizens are requesting this, but if they do, it should be made available, as these are the people that are paying the bills. This will provide a great tool for the elected officials who are also tasked with parts of hiring process, dealing with pay levels, dealing with interviews, dealing with benefits, dealing with creating new positions, moving our employees to salaried employees. There's so many of these things that we have to deal with, but we don't have real information to go off of. So I think it would be critical for the people sitting in this room to be able to have that information in the event that, hey, we want to create this position. Well, how many hours are we dealing with there? How, are we, out of a 2,000 hour a year, 2,040, are we looking at 200 hours we're short? Could we shift some job titles? Could we do something? Can we have some inner workings between departments? There's a million different ways to work through that. And you know that better than most. I mean, HR would be intricate in designing that and coming up with some ways to do it that it takes away the peaks and valleys, or it tries to take away as many peaks and valleys as possible. And that's good for everybody, because when you run into these times where it's a summer rush and you have people putting in 50, 55 hours a week to get through, we need to see that. And down the road, we need to be able to work to try to mitigate that in some ways. I mean, you're never going to make it flat, but having the information to work with it is crucial. Getting into the public perception on this. It's kind of interesting because Stephen had a discussion today about something completely different, and I won't get into that, but it struck me after I got off the phone with you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you had said public perception is everything in municipal government. And I hadn't really thought of it that way, but I got off the phone and I'm like, he's right. And I think, what better way than to create the accountability, the transparency? Because if you vote no to this, the public's perception is, what are they hiding? Why are they doing this? Why would anybody not want to be able to tell us what's going on here? And I can't make an argument for them. I can't say, your money is paying for this, but you're not allowed to know that. It doesn't sit well with me, and it's just a hard pill to swallow. Large quantities of hours by an individual does not always equal a large output of productivity. I believe that's 100%. Low hours did not always equate low output either. This is a monitoring tool. These records will show trends, and the more you have them, the more records you have, the more information it'll provide. Policy updates. There would absolutely have to be policy updates. And I think that's acknowledged by everybody. You couldn't do something like this without acknowledging that. But that's another process to work through and speak of, important, have the discussions about what is desired through this and what's not. The last bullet point, I didn't really, I don't know, maybe you could elaborate on that one.
The public accountability one?
Pardon me?
The public accountability one?
Yeah, I read it and I was just kind of like,
So this one is the one caveat that for the transparency for taxpayers. So essentially what the exception is it's an exception to the rule with FLSA, which is typically, like I mentioned before, like if I was sick 2 days in the private sector and I'm a salaried employee, I don't have to put sick time in unless a policy says I have to put sick time in, but I'm still going to get paid my 40 for that week. What this exception basically says is we have a duty to taxpayers. And so if we have in our policy that we can take partial day absences or any type of policy around timekeeping in general, we can put this into play essentially, where if someone was to reach the max for, like they've used all their stuff, typically, like I said, FLSA says you can't deduct anything. This exception says we can because we owe it to taxpayers because they're paying our wages. So that's what that exception is.
okay, that makes sense.
But essentially what
I would not support that. I think you treat it just like a salaried employee would be treated. I think that's a good starting point anyhow.
And I would say, like, I don't ever see this as an issue now.
That one doesn't.
But I wanted to make sure that was transparent out there.
And then the last thing I'll say is this is an interesting topic tonight that we covered early, and the issue that we ran into with the trails. I just had to write myself no because I'm like, we've had some turnover. We've had finance, we've had HR, we've had public work. We have empty positions, and we don't know what happened. I think record keeping is very instrumental especially when you have turnover, happening at organizations, whether they're public or private. And that one right there, it makes me wonder, could we have looked back on that and seen some issues? Was somebody not here much during that time? Because that's what you can start looking at is, was the person having health problems? Or, was it a family member having an issue? Were they just not here? They were on vacation. Well, that kind of tells you we need to do something else to fill that position or to make sure that these things are happening correctly. Because whatever happened then, it was not good. Now, I'm not pointing fingers anywhere. I'm just saying more information that we have to go back and reflect on can open eyes to a lot of things moving forward and make you a more efficient, effective organization. So I will drop the ball there. I think that was long enough, and I got everybody sick of listening to me.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
So I just want to stress that I think one thing that can be noted is I truly believe all of our directors and our supervisors of employees are taking into account if they have an employee that is absent for a few days or things like that. I can't speak to when I haven't been here, but supervisors and directors are very in tune with whether or not their employees are here or not, and they are holding their employees accountable. So I want to stress, if the issue is that we feel like people aren't working the amount of hours they're supposed to be working, we should be holding Steve accountable, all of us directors accountable, because then we're not paying attention and we're not doing our jobs. I don't think tracking time is going to fix that. So I do want to stress that I think if tracking time is based on there's significant issues with people being in their seats doing their jobs, I don't think tracking time is going to fix that. That is just my personal opinion.
Any other discussion? Brian?
Yes. I can see some of the benefits mentioned of this, but I think one of the biggest problems that we would run into, and you kind of, when you mentioned micromanaging, I think obviously one of the biggest problems the city has had is keeping and finding employees, right? And I feel that this might cause an issue of micromanaging. We've had a lot of employees leave. I've kind of set it as a mission to find out why they left. A lot of them may have said a reason or another. A lot of the employees that I've talked to have said one of the main reasons they left was they feel like they were being micromanaged. And I think this really could be an issue. I don't want to lose any more good employees that we have. So that would be a key issue that I'm afraid might happen if we go with this.
Any other discussion, Rebecca? Okay. So my question, I guess, would be just for Jessica. Mike makes a very valid point, a lot of very valid points. But I also feel that this is a huge monumental change in how we administer our human resources, our payroll, and the fact that I do think it's going to have an impact on morale in our culture. And the questions to consider, I don't know if we want to know the answers to those. In my 8 months or so as a council member, I feel like we balance our budget by having 10 positions open, and someone is picking up those hours. But I think the argument that Mike makes is worth a full discussion on the council. And being that I'm still rather new to this, what is the methodology to get this to the full council for discussion from this committee?
This committee can choose to make a motion referring it to the full body for discussion at the next council meeting. That could be your motion.
Okay, I think there's worthwhile discussion there. Otherwise, I feel there's a lot of questions, and I think the answers are things we won't want to know the answer to. So, is there a motion to proceed with anything? Mike?
I'll make a motion to move it to council for full discussion.
I will second that. Any discussion, Rebecca?
If we're going to do that, can we make sure that this meeting is brought to the attention of the full council? Because we've now spent like 50 minutes on this topic and we're still with no answer. So imagine doubling that at the council meeting. So I'm just wanting to make sure that this video is watched by all council people, or at least they're given that opportunity prior to that meeting, so we aren't spinning our wheels for an hour on one topic.
Steve?
Thank you. Yeah, I've done this before on other issues from time to time from one of the subcommittees, either Board of Public Works or Finance, Budget, and Personnel. Sent an email out strongly encouraging and follow up with a reminder to all members who weren't present for this conversation to please, in advance, watch the meeting segment, and I can clip right to the part where it starts before you come to that meeting, because I think Rebecca makes a really excellent point. There's no sense rehashing everything that was said today. They should come having viewed that. The other thing I'd ask is if this is passed, I'd like your blessing to maybe have some discretion on my part to maybe not do it on the 26th of August, but look at the first meeting in September, because I was working on the council agenda for the 26th and it's already piling up a little bit, so.
Okay. Any other discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Aye.
The motion passes. Item 10, suggested items for future agendas. Anyone have anything? Rebecca?
Yeah, I do want to discuss, and I want to discuss a way of improving communication between the council and department heads with projects as they are ongoing, especially when they see these projects are exceeding the budget, the projected budget, or when change orders are being made. I think in regards to the trails that we talked about earlier, there should be a stopping point where council can stop the bleeding. They can stop the expense. They can stop this. It shouldn't ever be at a point where it's brought so late that the council doesn't have an option. And that's been happening, and it's happened multiple times, and it's happened it's happened for a lot of years. So I'd like to have a discussion on a method to switch that up and an accountability held at the department head level when this is not being followed.
Any other future item or suggested items for future agendas? Be looking for a motion to adjourn.
Move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those
Yes.
opposed? Meeting adjourned.